Imagine a world where a simple step on someone else's land can intensify a centuries-old conflict, where the name of a people provokes laughter, hatred, and even repulsion, and where the story of an old division still echoes in every gesture and word. This is the story of a people, rejected, disregarded, and often invisible to the eyes of others. They were the Samaritans. Have you ever stopped to wonder why, in the middle of the 1st century, the Samaritans were viewed with such contempt by the Jews? What led to this animosity? And more importantly, what can we learn from this story of separation and eventually reconciliation? The answer begins long before Jesus arrived, long before the lessons on love of neighbor that he gave us. It begins with a political and religious divide that happened hundreds of years earlier, shortly after the death of one of Israel's greatest kings, Solomon. If this message touched you, be sure to leave your like and share in the comments what most impacted your view on inclusion. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos that will continue to challenge you to live in a more loving and inclusive way. After Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel was divided. The north formed the kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as its capital, while the south retained the lineage of David, with Judah and Jerusalem as its spiritual center. This schism was not only political, but also religious. And this is where the story gets complicated. Over time, the northern kingdom began to adopt alternative religious practices, far removed from the pure traditions of Jerusalem. King Jeroboam, fearing that his people would return to Jerusalem to worship, built altars at Bethel and Dan, distorting the original worship and mixing it with pagan influences. Alliances with foreign peoples intensified, creating a mixture of cultures and religious practices that, in the eyes of southern Jews, were an affront to true worship of God. In the year 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, and to ensure that the people of Israel would never rebel again, they took the 10 northern tribes into exile and brought foreigners to inhabit the land. The mixing of the remaining Israelites with these peoples gave rise to the Samaritans, a people seen by the Jews as unclean, as they had adopted hybrid religious practices, mixing worship of God with pagan cults. Now imagine being part of a people who are considered unclean by others. It was not only the name of the Samaritans that isolated them, but also their religious and cultural identity. They became the others to the Jews, a reminder of a spiritual and political betrayal that went back to the division of the kingdom. For centuries, this rejection endured until the moment when something extraordinary happened, something that would defy norms, break down barriers, and give us a powerful lesson about humanity and God's mercy. And that story begins not with a war, but with a simple question: who is my neighbor? Now, I invite you to reflect. What if it were possible for the one you despised most to be your savior? This is the paradox that will unfold when Jesus enters the story of the Samaritans. The story of the Samaritans is more than just a sequence of historical events. It is marked by a deep conflict that spans centuries. To understand how the Samaritans became the sworn enemies of the Jews, it is necessary to go back in time to the division of the Kingdom of Israel, an event that changed the history of the entire nation. After the death of King Solomon in 931 BC, the Kingdom of Israel was divided into two: the northern kingdom, with its capital in Samaria, and the southern kingdom with Jerusalem as its capital. The division was not only political, it also had a significant religious dimension. The northern kingdom, led initially by Jeroboam, took a different path from the southern kingdom. While Judah remained faithful to the Temple of Jerusalem and to the lineage of David, Israel in the north departed from the original traditions. Jeroboam, fearing that his people would return to Jerusalem to worship, decided to create alternative places of worship. He built altars at Bethel and Dan and placed golden calves for the people to worship. This was the beginning of a process that led to the formation of a hybrid religion, which mixed the worship of God with pagan practices, something that the Jews of Judah saw as a great heresy. The northern kingdom was constantly marked by instability. Israel had a series of ungodly kings, many of whom strayed further from God by practicing idolatry. This estrangement led to a spiritual and moral downfall, which eventually resulted in the kingdom's downfall. In 722 BC, the Assyrians invaded Israel, destroyed the city of Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, and drove most of the population into exile. Only the poorest and weakest were left behind. But the destruction of the northern kingdom was not the end of the Samaritans' story. The Assyrians, to prevent future revolts, brought other peoples of the empire to repopulate the region of Samaria. Babylonians, Cuthites, and other pagan peoples settled there, bringing with them their own religions and cultural practices. These new inhabitants began to mix with the remaining Israelites, creating a new people with a unique religious and cultural identity. This new group was called the Samaritans. The Samaritans accepted part of the law of Moses, but they did not follow all of the sacred scriptures that the Jews of Judah respected. They rejected the prophets and the other books of the Hebrew Bible, adopting only the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, as their religious basis. This religious difference was one of the central points that led to hostility between Jews and Samaritans. In time, the Samaritans continued to live in Samaria, and their syncretic religious practices became even more pronounced. They created a strong identity of their own, but the Jews of Judah never accepted them, considering them as an impure people, the result of a mixture of races and religions. The rejection was so intense that for many centuries the Samaritans were seen as enemies of the Jews. The story of the Samaritans and their rejection by the Jews is a reflection on how religious and cultural divisions can create barriers that are difficult to overcome. Although circumstances have changed, tensions between different groups still exist today. Religious and ethnic groups continue to face marginalization, as in the case of many minorities in regions of the Middle East and Africa. The story of the Samaritans reminds us of how exclusion and prejudice can be passed down from generation to generation, creating deep divisions that can only be healed with understanding, acceptance, and most of all, love. This historical division between Jews and Samaritans had a lasting impact. The religion and culture of both groups were radically different, and these differences fueled a cycle of hostility that for many centuries seemed unchanging. But what would happen if someone challenged this separation? The answer would come with the arrival of Jesus, who would not only break down these barriers, but also forever change the way people viewed one another, regardless of their background or belief. At the heart of the Samaritan story is a remarkable twist, a transformation that defies the conventions of its time and redefines the meaning of love and inclusion. To understand the depth of this change, we need to examine the second major theme that emerges from this narrative, the transcendence of the social and religious barriers that Jesus brought. When Jesus appeared on the scene, he not only challenged the religious norms of the Jews, but also subverted expectations of how others should be treated. The rivalry between Jews and Samaritans was something so ingrained and visceral that no one would imagine that a Jew would approach a Samaritan in a friendly way, let alone treat a Samaritan with respect. Jesus did just that. He broke down the cultural and religious barriers that defined the relationship between these two peoples. What the Jews saw as impurity, Jesus saw as an opportunity to teach something much deeper. Love of neighbor has no limits. He taught not only about loving those who are like us, but about expanding the concept of neighbor to include even those we consider enemies. The most emblematic story about this transformation is undoubtedly the parable of the Good Samaritan recorded in the Gospel of Luke. In this parable, Jesus directly confronts the prejudiced idea of who is worthy of love and compassion. The parable tells the story of a Jewish man who is attacked by thieves, beaten, and left by the side of the road. 3 men pass by it: a Jewish priest, a Levite, also a Jew, and a Samaritan. The priest and the Levite, both respected religious figures, ignore the injured man and go on their way. But the Samaritan, someone who should be seen as an enemy, approaches, offers help, tends to the man's wounds, and takes him to safety. In telling this story, Jesus challenged a deeply held notion. The Jews thought that compassion was reserved for members of their own group, but Jesus showed that true kindness transcends any cultural or religious barrier. The Samaritan was the hero of the story, not only for his kind deed, but because he was able to see beyond divisions and act humanely. This parable illustrates the central concept of Jesus' teaching. Love of neighbor is unconditional. Jesus is not saying that we should simply love people who are like us, but rather that we should extend our love, our compassion, and our help to everyone, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, or social status. It breaks with the limits imposed by society and calls us to create a community based on empathy and mutual care without distinctions. Another powerful moment of this transformation occurs in the Gospel of John, when Jesus meets a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. To understand the importance of this encounter, we need to understand the social context of the time. A Jew would never speak to a Samaritan, much less to a Samaritan woman. Social segregation was strong, and women, especially those of Samaritan origin, were seen as less worthy of respectful dialogue. However, Jesus not only talks to the woman, but also offers her something that transcends any material good: the living water, a symbol of salvation and spiritual transformation. He reveals his knowledge of her life without judging her and offers an opportunity for change and renewal. This dialogue goes far beyond the simple exchange of words. It demonstrates Jesus' willingness to break down social and religious barriers to reach and transform the lives of marginalized people. The fact that Jesus chose a Samaritan woman as the vehicle for publicizing his identity as the Messiah is also deeply significant. At a time when women were disregarded, he included them in his ministry, giving them a voice and dignity. And the Samaritan woman, after having this transformative experience, goes to her city and becomes one of the first missionaries, spreading the word of Jesus. Today, Jesus' lessons about love and inclusion are more relevant than ever. In a world marked by deep divisions, be they religious, ethnic, political, or social, Jesus' message of loving others remains a powerful and timely challenge. It teaches us that we must look beyond the barriers created by society and see the human value in everyone, even those who are different from us. In many parts of the world, modern Samaritans can be compared to marginalized minorities, such as refugees, immigrants, or even religious and cultural groups with whom society at large has difficulty relating. The story of Jesus challenges us to look at these people with the eyes of mercy and to extend our helping hand, just as the Good Samaritan did. After all, loving your neighbor essentially means embracing those who are often seen as the others, the marginalized. If you've been following this far, enjoy this video and subscribe for more inspiring content. Share in the comments how you have seen inclusion in your life and how Jesus teaches us to look at others with compassion. Not only did Jesus challenge the barriers between Jews and Samaritans during his lifetime, but his impact endures to this day, teaching us the importance of inclusion, forgiveness, and reconciliation in an often divided world. The third and final major theme that emerges from this narrative is the continuity of Jesus' legacy and his radical message of love that bridges divisions. When Jesus interacted with the Samaritans, he not only healed a historical divide between two groups, but also laid the foundation for lasting change in the way societies could handle differences and conflicts. His message was a radical vision for his time. There are no exclusions in the kingdom of God. After his death and resurrection, Jesus' disciples continued this mission of inclusion. One of the first significant moments in the spread of his message beyond the Jews occurred when Philip, one of Jesus' followers, preached in Samaria. This event, recounted in the book of Acts, showed that Jesus' message was not intended for a single ethnicity or religious group, but for all people. The impact of Jesus' transformation was not restricted to his time. His inclusive approach spread, completely altering the dynamic between Jews and Samaritans. Although during Jesus' time, many Jews still viewed the Samaritans with contempt, the acceptance of the Samaritans as part of the Christian community became one of the greatest testimonies to the power of his message. After Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit descended upon the followers of Jesus, Christianity began to spread among the Samaritans. This event not only confirmed the universality of the gospel, but it was also an important step in restoring unity between the two peoples who had previously been separated by centuries of hostility. The conversion of the Samaritans to Christianity was a powerful affirmation that in Christ there is no longer Jew or Samaritan, neither male nor female. All are one. While Christianity has embraced the inclusion of Samaritans, the historical narrative of how faith communities have come to view ethnic and religious differences has yet to be deepened. According to current studies of early Christianity, tensions between the followers of Jesus and other religions only began to be resolved more concretely after the Christian councils in the 4th century, when they sought to establish a universal identity for the Christian faith. The message of Jesus, when applied to the modern world, remains crucial. We live in a time where social, political, religious, and cultural divisions are still very present. As Christians, we are called to follow Christ's example by extending inclusion and love to all people, no matter their background or social status. In many parts of the world, divisions between different religious and ethnic groups are still painfully visible. The Middle East, for example, remains a site of intense conflict between different religious factions, with each group trying to assert its identity and the superiority of its faith. Jesus' teachings, however, offer an alternative. Instead of living on the basis of hatred and segregation, he teaches us to see the other as our neighbor, challenging the prejudices we create. But the work of reconciling these divisions is not easy. It requires commitment, forgiveness, and, above all, concrete action. This is reflected in communities that seek to live out the principles of Jesus by working for peace, justice, and unity, especially in places of great tension, such as in areas of religious conflict. The legacy of Jesus is alive today, in the hands of those who work to break down the barriers that the world tries to put between people. The issue of forgiveness is central to Jesus' message. He calls us not only to love those we love, but also to forgive our enemies, including those who have historically wronged us. In a world where resentment and revenge often seem the most natural responses, Jesus' message offers a profoundly revolutionary alternative. Forgiveness is the key to true peace. By forgiving, we are able to free ourselves from the chains of hatred and revenge, and in doing so, we make room for reconciliation and healing. This does not mean ignoring the injustices or mistakes made, but rather freeing oneself from the weight of hurt and giving the opportunity for transformation. Forgiveness is a crucial element of inclusion, as it allows the wounds of the past to heal, giving a new beginning. Nowadays, the division between different groups is still a very present reality. Human relations continue to be marked by religious, political, and social polarizations, where the idea of us against them remains an obstacle to true understanding and coexistence. Jesus, however, not only challenged this mindset in his day, but also left us a legacy of unity, which can be applied deeply to the issues of the modern world. The contemporary world, despite so many technological and social advances, still faces barriers created by prejudices and divisions. Whether on a religious, ethnic, or political level, people continue to separate themselves based on differences that are often more constructed than real. However, the teachings of Jesus call us to a radical unity, which goes beyond simple, tolerant coexistence to a model of life where love for one's neighbor is the basis of all actions. Religious division, for example, has been a constant source of conflict throughout history. The beliefs of different peoples often generate friction, and often the other is seen as an enemy or a threat. But Jesus' lesson on the importance of loving without distinction opens a path to reconciliation. He has shown with his words and actions that there are no limits to God's love, and that every human being, regardless of their faith or background, is worthy of this compassion. Contemporary society can mirror this example. Instead of clinging to differences, it is possible and necessary to find common ground, valuing the riches that each culture, religion, or perspective can offer. Love of neighbor, as taught by Jesus, is the key to overcoming the barriers that still exist between different groups. But for this to happen, one must not only accept the other, but also understand the struggles and challenges they face, just as Jesus did when reaching out to Samaritans, marginalized women, and others excluded from his time. The danger of exclusion in the contemporary world. Even though modern society is more open than ever, the risk of exclusion remains a constant threat. Minorities, whether religious, ethnic, or cultural, continue to be marginalized in various parts of the world. Discrimination and prejudice, although challenged by legislation and social movements, are still fueled by stereotypes and unfounded fears. The exclusion of any group, whether by skin color, religion, or orientation, goes against the principles that Jesus defended. Jesus' example challenges us to reflect. How do we react when we are confronted with someone who is different from us? What we see is that many times our responses are shaped by society, the media, or the hate speech that surrounds us. But Christ's teachings call on everyone to reject these influences and to adopt a posture of true inclusion, which seeks the well-being of all, without exception. Instead of taking refuge in circles of safety where everyone thinks and acts the same way, Jesus' message invites us to open our hearts to those who are marginalized, as he did to the Samaritans, women, and other groups of his day. He never avoided an encounter with those who were considered impure or less worthy by society, and the unity he promoted goes beyond the boundaries of the time, reaching us. Today's world demands a new form of leadership, a leadership that is built on the principles of empathy, acceptance, and welcoming. Companies, organizations, governments, and religious institutions are beginning to realize that diversity is not an obstacle, but a wealth that, if well used, can transform society for the better. This is the power of inclusion. When all voices are heard, all hands are outstretched, and everyone is welcome, society as a whole grows and is strengthened. Christians are called to be agents of this transformation. The example of Jesus, who welcomed the excluded and who taught about unconditional love, should serve as a model for the action of all those who follow his teachings. In a world where hatred and intolerance often take the lead, Christ's response remains compassion, peace, and unity. As disciples, we cannot be content with tolerance alone. We must seek true unity, which is born of understanding and genuine love for others. Although efforts for inclusion are ongoing, statistics still show a high level of social exclusion and systemic bias in various societies. According to UN data, more than 1 billion people live in conditions of extreme poverty, often marginalized by factors such as ethnicity, gender, or social status. True inclusion, as proposed by Jesus, is not just a matter of superficial acceptance, but an active effort to restore dignity and ensure equal opportunities for all. The story of the Samaritans and their relationship with the Jews is not just an ancient narrative. It reflects a reality we still face today. The divisions that arise between groups based on cultural, religious, and social differences. When we look at Jesus' example, we see that he challenged these barriers and taught us that in God, there are no boundaries between human beings. During his ministry, Jesus not only preached about love of neighbor, but lived that love in a practical way. By reaching out to Samaritans, marginalized women, and people on the margins of society, he showed that no one is excluded from God's love. This was not a simple gesture of kindness. It was a radical movement that reconfigured the way people viewed each other. Jesus showed us that true community is not only made up of those who look like us or share the same faith, but of everyone who, in their humanity, is entitled to compassion and care. His interaction with the Samaritans in particular was a paradigm shift. Not only did he reject the norms of the time, but he also created a space where unity and love overcame division and prejudice. Today, the same message of Jesus is a call to tear down the walls that still separate us. In a world where conflict and division continue to tear people apart, it is our responsibility to act on Christ's example. It's not just about accepting others, but about actively seeking the well-being of those who are marginalized and ensuring that no one is left behind. So the question that remains is simple. How are you practicing this inclusion? How can you, in your everyday life, break down barriers and reach out to those that society often ignores? It is not just a matter of being tolerant, but of being proactive in love, looking at others with the eyes of Christ. The story of the Samaritans teaches us that everyone is worthy of love and respect, and that the greatest challenges can be overcome when we choose to view the other with compassion. May we, each of us, be the change we want to see in the world, living in ways that bring unity, healing, and understanding where there were once divisions. Jesus' legacy is clear. There are no more others when it comes to love. All are worthy of being loved. Let this be your daily challenge, to transform the world around you with the power of love and inclusion. Now that you know the impact of practicing inclusion and love for others, like, subscribe, and share in the comments how you will apply these teachings in your daily life. Don't miss the next video and continue with us on this journey of transformation.